Hello everyone, I'm Claudia Lash, and today I thought I would talk to you about one of my favorite kinds of quilts and quilt techniques. I really enjoy peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We might say them PB&J sandwiches. I also really enjoy PB&A quilts. These are some examples of PB&A quilts. PB&A is pieced blocks with applique on top. I have found that I use PB&A a lot in my quilt making, and I think it's a great way to show off what you want to have with a simple background and with some applique on top to really make a picture out of it. So here are some examples. This is smoke signals, this is flower signals, and this is whispering leaves. They are all examples of PB&A quilts. So when I'm making a PB&A quilt, I decide the design some way, and usually my design has a background that's fairly simple. I use simple pieced blocks for most of the backgrounds. On this quilt and on this quilt, these are half square triangles. On this quilt, the background is 4-patch. It's oh, yep, it'll come. It's a rail fence background. It's a 4-patch rail fence background. And when I am thinking of the background, I want these backgrounds to be staying in the back. So if I do a simple block, that helps them sort of stay in the back. I usually pick fabrics that are going to be more low volume fabrics, and so they don't take over the quilt. I know I'm going to be putting something on top. I don't want the background to jump out and command attention. So you can always, when you are doing this kind of background, you can always switch it up a little bit. On this quilt, the inside blocks are all done with tans and creams and light colors, but I still use the rail fence block in the outside too. I just used all darker colors. So if you intentionally want to change your color change through the quilt, you can do that as long as they're low volume, so that they all kind of stay in the background. Then your applique can be stuck on top. The first thing I do after I have the design is I make the background, and the background I will make 2 or 3 blocks, sew them together, make sure I still like them, and then make more. I never make or cut out all of these background blocks and until I've tried them out. I suggest that that's a good way to go, unless you want to maybe have a lot of waste, because oftentimes when I put them up on the design wall, I will let them sit for a day or two and think, oh gosh, I really don't like that quite. I'll make a few changes, and it makes a big difference. So when I sew them together, I sew the backgrounds together in sections. This is a fairly large quilt, and if I tried to applique this smoke signal on top with this whole quilt under that sewing machine, it would be just a chore. So I sew the quilt background into maybe 3 or 4 sections. At least on this one, I'm pretty sure I must have done 4 sections. And then I have each section, so then when I'm ready to put the applique on, I can put the applique on 1/4 of the quilt, and then move to the next and put the applique there, until I've got them all appliqued, and then sew these sections together. It's just a whole lot easier. When you're thinking of the applique, I usually try to make the applique fairly simple because you are fusing it down and sewing it with a blanket stitch. So you don't want to have something that's going to require a lot of stitching. These are just stitched around the outside and then stitched around the inside. Every raw edge will need to be stitched around, but if you're doing it on a small little section, it's not too bad. Then this quilt, they're all the same applique. On this quilt, I decided that I found some fabric that was a black fabric with big flowers on it. And the flowers were separated from one another, so they were easy to cut out and keep them separate. So I took the fabric and put the fusible web on the back so that it was covering as much as, or all of the flower that I wanted. Flipped it over and then cut it out on the top where I could see. And then I used black thread, or you could use invisible thread, to sew these appliques down. Then on this quilt, I decided that I wanted a little something extra inside these leaves. So I found some sparkly tulle and I stuck it inside, or just kind of tucked it under the outside edge of the leaf. And I think it adds a little something extra so that when people see this quilt, they maybe take a second look and think, oh, there's something different in there. I also added some satin stitching to make the veins of the leaf show a little bit. So I think there are so very many ideas that you could use to make your own PB&A quilts. You can make them big, or you can make them smaller for wall quilts. I have others that I have done as wall quilts, and I think they're just so much fun. They allow you to be an artist. Your quilt will be unique and one-of-a-kind type of quilt. So I encourage you to try out a PB&A quilt.